If I can have an A. When you practice, you've got to really listen very, very carefully as to what goes on. So whether it's vibrato, whether it's the quality of sound, and whether it is, most importantly, intonation. Intonation is so, you can get hypnotized with intonation by hearing something that is only slightly out of tune and being able to live with it. And I always say you've got to be obsessed by absolutely playing everything dead in tune. When you practice, 15%, I don't know why I arrived at 15%, it can be 17 or 20, but 15% of your brain should be dedicated to watching and listening to the intonation. Because, like I said before, intonation has a way of hypnotizing the listener into hearing something that's almost there. But we want to get rid of the almost. We want the intonation to be dead on. So always listening to the intonation, regardless of the difficulty of the music. Because sometimes when the music is difficult for whatever reason, whether it's for phrasing or for technique, we tend to concentrate on those aspects. But the intonation should always be in the back burner. It should always be there, so that if you're practicing something, you know, if you're doing so I'm practicing for color. Practice, okay, great, practice for color, but make sure that it's in tune. You know, so make sure that your brain is always the guard of the intonation. So it's my suggestion is to really concentrate on that. And what you want to do is that when you have something that's very difficult, make sure that you play it in little segments. You know, play 2 bars or 3 bars. You don't have to play more. And those 2-3 bars should have, you should be able to make sure that everything on those 3 bars is correct. Intonation, phrasing, articulation, and so on. I'm saying to reduce it to small in increments, not just by going a whole page, but by saying, I'll play 3-4 bars and let's see if I can make all those 3-4 bars beautifully in tune, you know, articulated and musical. So if you do it in smaller increments, I think it's better. Again? There are several things we can talk about intonation, but what I first would like to do is to discuss intonation when you play with another instrument. So we should demonstrate. So June, who's going to play the piano, please come on in. And and what we always start is asking for an A from the piano, just to make sure that we are in tune. So if I can have an A. Can I have another? All right, so I asked for another A. It's really very, very important to make sure that when the pianist gives you an A, that you take that A at face value, that it's a real A. It's not like sort of an A. You know, let me show you sort of an A, all right? Okay, can I have another A? Again? It's still too flat. And then you tune. Now, why am I being so picky about this? I'm being so picky because if your A is not just right, it's difficult. Then you can be in tune with yourself, but not in tune with the piano. And if you're playing with the piano, whether you're playing a sonata, a Mozart sonata, which, by the way, it says sonata for piano and violin, not violin and piano. The piano is a very, very important part of a sonata. It is also a very important part of anything. So let me try and see. This is very difficult, but I'll try and see if I can do this. June, why don't we do the beginning of the Mendelssohn Concerto, and I'll try to play it slightly out of tune, but in tune with myself, and see what happens, okay? All right. Now, I don't think I did such a good job. It sounded too much out of tune to my liking. But I was basically okay with the way I was playing, but I was too sharp for the piano. So that's why if you are not tuned with, if your A is not exactly tuned to the piano, you're going to have a problem. So let's try it one more time, and I'll try and do it a little bit more in tune and see what happens. All right, so now there's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong with intonation. You can have one single note that can go wrong, or you can have like a cluster of notes that can go wrong. By what I mean is wrong, they can go out of tune. What happens is that sometimes if you play one note that's flat, then the next few notes sort of become flat as well. So if for some reason when you play and you hear a note that's flat, make sure that you're back to the intonation that you're supposed to do. Don't let that flat note carry you flat all the way. And that's really very it's very critical. The pianist cannot put a key into the piano and tune the piano. You can tune the pegs. So it's up to you to make sure that the intonation is totally identical. The A of the piano is identical to the A of the violin. Now, does that mean you're going to play automatically in tune? No, it doesn't mean that. But at least you have a chance to it's a good start. That's a D. That's not a D. That's a sharp D. It's a flat D. I like my D to be a good D. And that's a good D. If the note is out of tune, it means that the distance between the previous note and that note is not exactly accurate. So you have to always, whenever a note is out of tune, you always have to go to the note before, or even to the phrase before, so that you have the distance. So, for example, if I want to go from a B to a G sharp, and the G sharp is a little out of tune. So so I go. So that's out of tune. All right. So what usually people do is they go and they correct it. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't accomplish anything. It just gives you the satisfaction that you are now playing the correct intonation. The intonation is correct, but it doesn't really solve the problem. When the problem is, do I remember the distance between B and G sharp? That's that. So whenever something is out of tune, don't correct it. Just go back. Now, if you correct it, it's not going to do any harm, but it's not going to do you any good either. It's not going to solve the problem. And of course, the main problem is just to see when something is out of tune, I always say to people, don't say, that was out of tune. You don't say that because that doesn't help. That's just a general statement that it was out of tune. What you need to say is, was it sharp or was it flat? Because that's basically what out of tune is. It's either one way or the other way. It's very, very simple. So now if you say it was sharp and you hear that, then you are starting with some sort of information. Oh, I'm playing this note sharp all the time. So I'm going to try and reduce the distance between the first note and the second note, which is sharp. So now you are giving yourself some useful information. To say something is out of tune, it was so out of tune, it doesn't help. Just it's a general statement that actually judges you as, I'm playing this out of tune, it's terrible, instead of just saying, I'm doing it like that, and I always keep doing this sharp, so I better fix it. I go a couple of notes before, and then try and figure out how the distance is. If it's too sharp, I'm going to try and reduce it a little bit. If it's too flat, I'm going to try and increase it a little bit. When you look at the fingerboard, there's nothing there. There's no markings or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I think that some of the early Suzuki systems, they actually mark the fingerboard with pieces of white tape so that the kids will know where to put the fingers. But when, after a while, you have to actually remember the spaces by feel. So that, if you go, I actually feel the spaces so that it prevents me from playing, because it prevents me from doing it, because I know where the spaces are. But that's a question of studying it. And, I always like to say that it's almost like the tip of your fingers have eyes. And that those eyes know where is a G sharp on the A string. I don't have to go, there it is. How do I know that? I don't know. I just know that it's there. It's in my brain. That's where the G sharp is on the high thing. If I want to go on the G string, go a high G, there it is. It's there. Maybe I miss it by a millimeter, but I know where the house is. I get into the house. I always say, the thing about intonation is you don't want to stay outside of the house. You want to go into the house. Outside of the house is a little bit like that, but there is you open the door and you're in your house, the house of intonation. That should be a title of a book, The House of Intonation. So it's a question basically of knowing your fingerboard. And that has to do with, obviously you have to practice and you have to scales. Again, scales are one of the reasons that you learn how to manipulate and to know where the spaces are on the fingerboard. When I first studied with my teacher who was of a Russian background, strongly believed in the power of scales and in the necessity of practicing scales. And so she made me do that, and for the first 8-9 years of my playing, 8 years, that's what I did every morning. I practiced at least an hour of scales. So when I came to the United States, I think like when I was about 14 years old, Yasha Heifetz visited the Juilliard School and was asked to listen to some students. And I was lucky enough that Mr. Galamian at that time asked me to come to the studio and to play for Mr. Heifetz. And I had some works that I played. I played a Paganini Caprice and some Lalo and so on. And Mr. Galamian said, "Thank you very, very much. And Heifetz said, not so fast. I'd like to hear some scales.
Well, how about C major scale? That should be in readiness at all times. Don't be overly generous. Just could you play twice, you think? And an arpeggio with it?
Ooh, that was the frightening thing, because scales always put you in a humbling situation. You can play all sorts of stuff, and then when it comes to scales is a very transparent, pure thing, and it just has that, basics. It shows how basically you know the fingerboard. Well, luckily, since I was practicing scales for the last 8 years, my teacher made me practice, I had it all in my fingers. So, so I asked him what key he wanted me to play, and he said, something, and he said something like F sharp minor, something very difficult key. And I just went and played everything. I played it in single notes and double stops and thirds and harmonics, arpeggios and stuff. I gave him the whole spiel, pun intended. And he was he looked at Galamian, and Galamian was just laughing. He was going, he got you there, because, I surprised him. I think that impressed him more than anything that I played before. So, because as I said, he felt that scales were the basics of technique. There are certain people that are, for me, examples of playing or singing with a perfect intonation. The first person that comes to mind when it comes to the violinists is Jascha Heifetz. Anything that you hear by Heifetz would be perfectly in tune. So if you want to listen to something that is perfectly in tune, listen to Heifetz. When it comes to singers, interestingly enough, one singer that comes to mind for me, who was interestingly not musically trained, but so totally naturalist, is Ella Fitzgerald. Listening to anything that Ella Fitzgerald sang, the intonation was like dead on. It was absolutely incredible. And of course, her phrasing and everything was great, but the intonation for me was something that is very difficult for singers, I think. A lot of singers sing, beautifully in tune, and there's some who don't, and so on. And it's a question of feeling in your throat the intonation. But she was amazing.